What do you remember about air-cooled engines in cars? Of course, we know the early VWs and Porsches were air-cooled. But do you remember the Chevy Corvair? Stick with me for a few minutes while I go back in time and explore some great automotive history. Hello, I'm your host, Gary Neidert, and you're listening to My First Ride podcast. During the next few weeks, I'm going to talk about different cars with air-cooled engines. What a deal! Not having to mess with coolant and radiators. Well, those were the days. Today, I highlight the Chevy Corvair. When first introduced, it's kind of boxy and ugly. But towards the end of production in its second generation, the Corvair was pretty stylish. Even Jay Leno says they're cool. More on that later. My inspiration for talking about the Corvair came as I watched Jay Leno feature one of his on YouTube. He's got 3 different Corvairs, and this one was a red one, and it's very cool. Even Tony Dow from To Beaver has one. Now, this is going to be fun to talk about, and I know you're going to enjoy this story. So let's just get right into it. Now, this information comes from Wikipedia. They have a separate page for the Chevy Corvair. And the Chevy Corvair, was a compact car manufactured by Chevrolet from 1960 to 1969. There were only 2 generations of the Corvair. It remained the only American-designed, mass-produced passenger car with a rear-mounted, air-cooled engine. The Corvair had a total production of about just under 2 million units between 1960 and 69. The name Corvair originated as a combination of the words Corvette and Bel Air. When applied to the production models, the air part referenced the engine's cooling system. In 1952, Ed Cole was promoted to chief engineer of the Chevrolet Motor Division. And 4 years later, in July of 1956, he was named general manager of Chevrolet and became a vice president of General Motors. At Chevrolet, he was completely involved in the development and production of the air-cooled rear-engine Corvair. It was a groundbreaking car in its day. As chief engineer, Cole was also heavily involved in development of the Corvair. How about that? He's also known as the, quote, father of the small block Chevy V8, one of the most celebrated engines in automotive history. Now, as a side note, the small block family spanned from 262 cubic inches to 400 cubic inch in displacement. The small block engine was a series of V8 engines used in normal production by the Chevrolet division of General Motors between 1954 and 2003, using the same basic engine block. By the late 1950s, the physical size of the entry-level models offered by the big 3 American domestic auto manufacturers, that would be General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, their cars had grown considerably, effectively abandoning the market for the smaller vehicles that had been available in the past. A successful modern compact car market segment was established in the U.S. by the 1950 Nash Rambler. We've talked about Nash. Growing sales of imports from Europe showed that demand existed in the U.S. market for small cars, often as a second car or an alternative for budget-minded consumers. While the big 3 continued to introduce ever larger cars during the 1950s, The new American Motors Corporation focused its business strategy on smaller sized and fuel-efficient automobiles years before a real need for them existed. AMC, a far smaller company than the big three, positioned itself as a dinosaur fighter or an underdog. Its compact Rambler model helped push AMC to third place in domestic automobile sales. Which one got bumped out? Was it Ford, Chevrolet, or Chrysler? I don't know. We'll have to dig in and find out. During 59 and 1960, the big three automakers planned to introduce their own compact car. Ford and Chevrolet's designs were scaled-down versions of the conventional American car, using 4 or 6-cylinder engines instead of V8s, and with bodies about 20% smaller than their standard cars. An exception to this strategy was the Chevrolet Corvair. Chevrolet designed a car that deviated from traditional norms of design, powered by an air-cooled, horizontally opposed 6-cylinder engine with many major components in aluminum. The engine was mounted in the rear of the car, driving the rear wheels through a compact transaxle. Suspension was independent at all 4 wheels. Bodywork used the monocoque rather than body-on-frame construction. The tires were wider, low-profile design mounted on wider wheels. And the styling was unconventional for Detroit, with no tail fins or chrome grille. Imagine that. The deal of the day, the bigger the fins and the more chrome you have on your car, the more popular it's going to be. Corvair, they went against the grain. They swam upstream. Its engineering earned numerous patents. Time magazine put Ed Cole and the Corvair on the cover. Motor Trend named Corvair the 1960 Car of the Year. Chevrolet claimed that the rear engine design offered packaging and economy advantages, providing the car with a lower silhouette, flat passenger compartment floor, no need for power-assisted steering or brakes, and improvements in ride quality, traction, and braking balance. The design also attracted customers of other makes, primarily imports. The Corvair stood out with engineering different from other American offerings. It used GM's design and engineering that advanced the rear engine, rear-wheel drive layout, most recently brought back into the market by cars including, well, it says here the Tucker, but the Tucker was an American-made car. However, it never went into full production. It wasn't mass-produced. But the Fiat 500, the Porsche 356, the Volkswagen Beetle, the Renault Dauphine, however you say it, and the Subaru 360. Corvair's engine was an overhead valve aluminum air-cooled 140 cubic inch 6, later enlarged to first 145 cubic inches and then to 164 cubic inches. First Corvair engine produced 80 horsepower. Oh, it was really romping and stomping. It made twice the horsepower of a Volkswagen Beetle. In 1965, the power peaked with the turbocharged 180 horsepower Corsa engine option. The first generation model's swing axle rear suspension, invented and patented by engineer Edmund Rumpler in 1903, offered a comfortable ride. The design was replaced in the 1965 model year with a fully independent trailing arm rear suspension, similar to the Corvette Stingray. The first generation ran between 1960 and 1964, and it had the 569, 769 series four-door sedans, and they were conceived as economy cars, offering few amenities to keep the price competitive. and it wound up selling for just under $2,000. It was powered by the Chevrolet Turbo Air 6 engine, like I said, with 80 horsepower, and mated to a 3-speed manual or an optional extra cost 2-speed Power Glide. That's an automatic transmission. The Corvair was designed to have comparable acceleration to the 6-cylinder full-size Chevrolet Biscayne. The Corvair's unique design included the Quadraflex independent suspension and Unipack power team of engines, transmission, and rear axle combined into a single unit. The Quadraflex used coil springs at all 4 wheels with independent rear suspension, and which was incorporated in the rear of the car. Following the success of the upmarket Mr. and Mrs. Monza styling concept cars at the 1960 Chicago Auto Show, management approved the neatly appointed bucket seat deluxe trim of the 900 series Monza as a 2-door club coupe only. The new Monza began arriving at Chevrolet dealers in April 1960 and became one of the most popular Corvairs. The success of the Monza model shows Chevrolet management that the compact Corvair was viewed more of a specialty car than a competitor in the economy segment to the conventionally designed Ford Falcon or the Chrysler Valiant. Chevrolet began a design program that resulted in the 1962 Chevy 2, which was a conventional layout compact. In 1961, Chevrolet introduced the Monza upscale trim to the 4-door sedans and the club coupe body styles. The 4-speed Monza caught the attention of the younger market and was sometimes referred to as the poor man's Porsche in various car magazines. The Monza series contributed to about half of the Corvair sales in 1961. In 1962, Chevrolet introduced few changes at the beginning of the year. In spring of 62, Chevrolet committed itself to the sporty image they had created for the Corvair by introducing a convertible version, then offering a high-performance 150 horsepower turbocharged Spider option for Monza coupes and convertibles, and this made the Corvair the second production automobile supplied with a turbocharger as a factory option. The other vehicle was an Oldsmobile F85 Turbo Jetfire that was released earlier in 1962. The 63 model year remained largely a carryover with minor trim and engineering changes. Self-adjusting brakes were new for 63, and of course, all Corvairs sold in 63, fully 80% were Monzas. The convertible model accounted for over 20% of all the Monzas sold. Despite a vastly improved 64 model, Corvair sales declined by close to 73,000 units that year. This was attributed to a number of factors, including the basic styling being 5 years old, the lack of a pillarless hardtop, which virtually all competing compact models had, the lack of a V8 engine, and the introduction of the Ford Mustang on April 17th, which broke all records for sales of a new model, and it ate into the Corvair sales. Now, the second generation ran from 1965 to 1969. It arrived for model year 1965 and was noted for its lack of the B-pillar and a new fully independent suspension replacing the original swing axle rear suspension. New refinements appeared on the 65 design. The Corsa became standard with an instrument panel featuring a 140 mile per hour speedometer with a trip odometer, a 6,000 RPM tachometer, cylinder head temperature gauge, analog clock with a sweeping second hand, a manifold vacuum pressure gauge, and a fuel gauge. Fuel gauge. I thought those were always standard. Maybe not on the Corvair. A much better heater system, larger brakes borrowed from the Chevelle, a stronger differential gear, a Delcotron alternator, which replaced the generator, and the significant chassis refinements were made. Out back, a new fully articulated rear suspension virtually eliminated the danger of previous generations' swing axles and was based on the contemporary Corvette Stingray. However, the Corvette used coil springs while the Stingray used a transverse leaf suspension. AM/FM stereo radio, in-dash all-weather air conditioning, telescopically adjusted steering column, and a special purpose chassis equipment handling package, or the Z17 option, which consisted of a special performance suspension and quick ratio steering box, were significant new options for 1965. The 1966 lineup remained essentially unchanged from 1965. Sales began to decline because of Ralph Nader's book highlighting the Corvair's supposed deficiencies, and the new Mustang offering V8s up to 271 horsepower compared to the Corvair's 180 horsepower top powertrain. Rumors of the upcoming Panther, which was the code name for the forthcoming Camaro, slated as a direct competitor for the Mustang, further undercut sales. A decision was made to discontinue further development of the Corvair. What a shame. In 1967, bucket seats in Mazda models were now of the same Astro style as those for the new, for 1967, Camaro, featuring a new thin shell design. Chevrolet introduced a 50,000-mile engine warranty on all Chevrolet models, which included the Corvair. Chevrolet was still actively marketing the Corvair in 1967, including color print ads and an "I Love My Corvair" bumper sticker campaign by dealers. But production and sales continued to fall off drastically. In 1968, the four-door hardtop was discontinued, leaving three models: the 500 and Monza hardtop coupes and Monza convertible. Additional safety features, including side marker lights and shoulder belts for closed models, were fitted per the federal government's requirements. Steering wheel for the 500s was the same as the base Novas, while Monza's got the same wheel as the Camaro. An Impala-style deluxe steering wheel was optional. All advertising was virtually stopped, and sales were down to just almost 16,000 units. The final model year, 1969, Corvairs were assembled with the Nova in Willow Run, Michigan, and this is the same facility Corvairs had been built in from the beginning. The Corvair was the only GM car in 1969 that didn't get a locking steering column. I mean, they were really cheaping out, I guess. Demand for Novas was high, and a decision was made in November of 1968 to move the Corvair assembly to a special offline area in the plant dubbed the Corvair Room, making Corvairs produced between that time and May 14th, 1969, essentially hand-built by a dedicated Corvair team. Assembled bodies arrived from Fisher Body and awaited assembly in the offline area. While the 1965 Corvair was received as a well-engineered, high-performance driver's car, that accomplishment was overshadowed by the phenomenal market success of the Ford Mustang. Mustang kicked everybody's butt. GM saw advantages to the route developed by Ford with the Mustang, a 4-seat semi-coupe body on a standard compact chassis with a small block V8 motor and a 4 on the floor offered as power options. Now, the Corvair was not cheap to produce. Developing and marketing a Mustang-style model based on the Nova platform had cost advantages. The 1965 publication of Unsafe at Any Speed sullied the reputation of the Corvair line, although the issues had nothing to do with the current model. Under competition from Mustang and the publicity hit of Unsafe, Corvair sales plummeted by over half in 1966. It was at this point GM saw the advantages of developing the Camaro and not the Corvair. According to GM historian Dave Newell, Chevrolet had planned on ending Corvair production after the 1966 model year. Development and engineering changes were halted in 1966 on the year-old redesigned second-generation cars with mainly federally mandated emissions and safety changes made afterwards. An increasing lack of interest from the company, especially from Chevrolet's general manager, John DeLorean. A complete absence of Corvair advertising after 1967 reflected the company's priorities, including promotion of 3 redesigned models for 1968: the Corvette, the Chevelle, and the Chevy 2 Nova. By 1969, Chevrolet's Corvair 4-page brochure was by request only. During its final year of production, only 6,000 cars were produced. I guess those were the handmade models. Consumer protection activist Ralph Nader addressed the handling issues of the first-generation Corvair in his 1965 book, Unsafe at Any Speed. The book highlighted crashes that related to the Corvair's suspension, and it identified Chevrolet suspension engineer who had fought management's decision to omit, for cost reasons, the front anti-sway bar installed on later models. Nader said during the subsequent congressional hearings, the Corvair is, quote, the leading candidate for the unsafest car title, end quote. Subsequently, Corvair sales fell from 220,000 in 1965 to 109,000, almost 110,000 in 1966. By 1968, production fell to just under 15,000, and then in 1969, only 6,000 were produced. Too bad. A 1972 Safety Commission report conducted by Texas A&M University concluded that the 1960 through 63 Corvair produced no greater potential for loss of control than its contemporary competitors in extreme situations. Journalist David E. Davis, in a 2009 article in Automobile Magazine, noted that despite Nader's claim that the swing axle rear suspension was dangerous, Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen all used similar swing axle concepts during that era. This is priceless, what I'm about to say here. Some contended that Nader's lack of an automotive engineering degree, or, get this, or a driver's license at the time he wrote Unsafe at Any Speed, he didn't have a driver's license. They say that disqualifies him as a critic of automotive safety. What a deal. In response to Nader's book, Mechanics Illustrated reviewer Tom McHale tried on purpose, tried to get a 1963 Corvair to flip, and at one point sliding sideways into a street curb, but he could not turn over the vehicle. He couldn't turn it over. So what kind of a hit piece was that all about that Ralph Nader did? Now, I had heard, seemed like I read it somewhere or heard on a video or a podcast, that the air pressure in the rear tires of the Corvairs were half of what it should be, which would cause handling problems in any car when you try to do emergency maneuvers. So why did Ralph Nader choose to do a hit piece on the Corvair? Maybe this is the controversy for this one. We found a controversy in the last 3 episodes. Maybe this is the controversy. A guy that didn't have an automotive engineering degree or even a driver's license was the critic and the self-proclaimed spokesperson to say that it wasn't safe. Anyway, that's my rant. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. I really enjoyed digging into the history of the Corvair. It's a cool car. I had a friend in high school that had one, and I think he had a couple of them. But they're cool cars. Now, be sure to go check out Jay Leno's YouTube channel, and it's called Jay Leno's Garage. Be sure and check out the one he did on the it was a 1966 Corvair Corsa. It was a turbocharged model. And he did a great review of the car, and he's got some great things to say about it. Now, for more detailed information about the Corvair, go to Wikipedia. I'll have all the links in the show notes where you can go to Jay Leno's YouTube channel and where you can go to Wikipedia to check out the Corvair information. Hope you enjoyed this part. Well, what's coming up next on My First Ride podcast? Constantly searching for people that would enjoy telling the stories of their first rides and how their lives were influenced by them. And I bet you probably know someone that would be a great guest for My First Ride podcast, right? Let me know a little bit about them and their story. What about you telling your story on the podcast? Let me know a little bit about you and your first ride. And let's see about getting you on this podcast so you can share your story and I can share it with the world. It needs to be told. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and much more. And of course, you can always go to the website at myfirstridepodcast.com. One final thought. You may not have your first ride, but you still have the memories. It's time to share them. Contact me if you have any question regarding today's podcast or if you'd like to be a guest on My First Ride podcast. I'm Gary Neidert, and you've just experienced My First Ride podcast. Call me, 972-771-7899. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.